This week's programme is something a little different that will hopefully help a few newbies and, who knows, some more experienced shooters too. Hello and welcome to AAR on Air. Yes, I want to address some of the simple but often unknown or simply overlooked answers to some of the most pressing problem questions. This week's programme really came about after spending some time down at Vector Air on Saturdays, as I've often been known to do, and listening to some of the issues people have had. And then the realisation that not everyone is aware of some of the simple remedies to some of those often avoidable issues. So let's get into it, shall we? Most of the issues are around accuracy, and they immediately blame their newly purchased pride and joy. Then there are other faults, and yet again the blame lands squarely on their recent purchase. Clipping. This is when the silencer fitted is either fitted incorrectly or is simply the wrong tool for the job. The first thing to do is to check that it is securely tightened to the barrel or shroud. Often these can work loose, and this will inevitably leave it with some play, and then the pellet, or even slug for that matter, when exiting the barrel will clip the internals on the silencer and will result in a loss of accuracy because of that clipping action. When fitting a silencer, it is important that it is secure on the end of the thread. Now, at this point, I will stress that no tools are required here, and if you even think about getting the mole grips out or the like to do this, then stop immediately and consider if you're in the right sport. This should be hand tight only, and I don't mean tightened by a Hulk wannabe, just hand tight to ensure it is seated squarely and correctly. This will solve the issue immediately if indeed it is a clipping issue. If you're still unsure, then remove the silencer and shoot without it and see if your grouping improves. Note I said grouping, because it is possible that with the silencer removed, the zero may change. The other possibility in higher caliber guns is that you have used the wrong size silencer. Most silencers are fine with both 177 and 22 calibers, but a larger 2.5 or .30 may well be too big a caliber for a standard silencer. So check this before you start down the range, because this may well cause damage immediately. You should know if you've been experiencing clipping issues, because you will often unscrew the silencer and tap this on the side and see small flakes of pellet fall out. If you then look down the silencer, I really shouldn't need to say this, but make sure it's not still on the end of the barrel. You may be able to see, if you look down it, where the baffles have been slightly damaged. Taking your rifle in and out of your bag can cause sometimes, or can be enough sometimes, to just loosen this slightly. So just check before you start. Fill pressure on a PCP. You may well be having a wonderful time on the range and suddenly you notice your shots are starting to drop slightly. How can that be? The last 500 shots have been great. The chances are your onboard pressure has dropped and now your pellets are coming out with way less energy behind them, and naturally they're going to drop at point of impact. Now the opposite is also possible if your gun is regulated, because if the pressure drops, this can cause it to come off reg, and then the power propelling the projectile is no longer regulated correctly and can become more erratic. So ideally, to prevent this, keep an eye on your pressures and don't let it get too low. And of course, don't overfill it either, as this can cause an awful lot of damage. Be sure you know the correct working pressures of your rifle and stick to them. And if it's not regulated, then you may well find it has a sweet spot. For example, I have a Gamma that is capable of 232 bar fill pressure, but I keep it to a maximum 200 bar fill pressure, and this gives the best performance for me. Whilst we're talking about pressures and power levels, it is always a good idea to keep an eye on your gun. Using a chronograph will let you know if an issue is happening, and of course to make sure you're not creeping up to excessive levels that may be more than your country's restrictions and legal levels. Now, I use a scan chronograph when I test guns, but there are some really very good budget ones available, such as the Nate Chroney, which is very accurate and won't break the bank either. It is possibly worth noting that there are also some quite inaccurate ones out there, so choose wisely. Pellets. Let's just briefly discuss pellets. I've said so many times, like John Hurt in the Harry Potter series of films, it's the wand that chooses the wizard. In this case, it's the barrel that will choose the pellets, not you. You may have a drawer full of old boxes of marksman pellets that you always shot for years and years, and then you were happy to hit a tin can at 20 yards. But now you've bought a superb AGT Vulcan 3 and want to use up your old supply. It is possible that you may strike it lucky, and the Vulcan may well like them. But I would say if you buy yourself a tin of QYS pellets, I will be pretty confident that you will have much better results, or maybe get yourself a sample pack to find out what your rifle actually likes, because some are more fussy than others, and of course some fare better at different distances than some others. You will then need to get your weights right, etc, etc. Now, sadly, there is no quick solution to this other than trial and error. You may be able to get a bit of guidance from someone who has the same rifle as yourself from, say, a forum or other, but there is still no substitute for trialling them yourselves. As a rough guide, fancy design pellets will often promise all kinds of penetration levels, etc., but they will be pretty inaccurate, and to take out your quarry, the first thing you need to do is hit it. Slugs. This is, again, another trial and error moment, but the main point I want to raise here is that as good as slugs are, they are designed for unchoked barrels, and using them in choked barrels will result in a build-up of lead in the end of that barrel, and will sooner or later affect accuracy, and at best will result in some heavy cleaning required to sort it out, or damage to the barrel at worst. So please make sure you're aware of what type of barrel you have before trying slugs. You will also need to be aware that slugs retain a high amount of energy at point of impact. Great! But they leave the barrel with less energy than a standard pellet. So your zero may well change, and as such affect your accuracy. Okay, so the points we've looked at so far are pretty easy to solve. Now let's look at where there may actually be a fault. Magazines. I have experienced sticking magazines from time to time, and this can actually cause problems with accuracy due to the incorrect loading of the pellet into the breech. Don't think it can happen or affect accuracy? Go and ask a target shooter why they use a single shot tray. You really need as smooth a transition as possible of the pellet into place ready for its trip down the barrel. Now, it could be that the magazine is damaged, poorly made, poorly designed, worn, dirty, or any number of things. It could also be that the shape, design and size of your pellet that you're using isn't particularly compatible with that magazine. It could be that your use of the magazine isn't what you would call sympathetic, or a little on the rough or aggressive side. Needless to say that you need to buy wisely, maintain carefully, and use sympathetically. That said, faulty items are made occasionally, and then you will need to get them checked out by a qualified individual. Whilst we're on this particular subject matter, cocking a rifle. Please keep it level or pointing downwards each time you cock it. Pointing it up into the air can often result in a pellet falling backwards into the block and cause annoying jams or trigger safety issues, cocking issues, and the only way to clear this is by often taking the block apart. So keep it on the level, as it were. Oh, and of course, double loading. I'm sure a lot of us over the years have double loaded before. There are a couple of things you need to do if you suspect that's what you've done. Firstly, remove the magazine. Then cock the rifle as if you're going to dry fire it. Then point it down at the ground, not stony ground because of potential ricocheting. Then fire the gun and see if the grass moves or not. Then the chances are you've got the barrel jammed if the grass doesn't move. This may cure itself with a couple of more attempts and repeating the process. If it doesn't and you feel there is nothing coming out in spite of the fact that you have plenty of air on board, then stop. Make sure everything is in safe, and then it would be likely that it is going to need some attention and possibly carefully rodding to clear the obstructions. If you're not completely confident in doing this, then get down to your local gunsmith to sort it for you. The key issue in this one is to take out the magazine the very first time you suspect there is an issue. I have experienced people put 33 pellets down one barrel, which means they have kept going at it with 4 magazines. So they've reloaded it 4 times. Needless to say, this was a little more than a simple rodding of the barrel and was a much more expensive and time-consuming job to put right. Bent barrel. You know, you really wouldn't think it possible to bend steel like that, but I've seen a few. One guy was complaining bitterly that the gun was inaccurate and went through 3 new guns until he realised what he was doing. He was a big guy, and once he'd put his gun in his bag, he then put it over his head and his back so tight that it was bending the bag and the gun inside. Of course, this often happens when people are unfortunate enough to accidentally drop their pride and joy, with the same upsetting result. Now, this leads to buying second hand, because I suppose the question to ask is, why are they selling it? Has it been dropped or damaged in any way? Buyer beware. There's quite a lot to think about so far, and this is by no means a full list of the simple problems that can arise from time to time, but hopefully it's given you a bit of a start. Okay, let's take a brief look at the issues around scopes, shall we? But note I said brief. It is very, very unusual for a scope of some quality to go wrong and cause any sorts of issues. If there is an issue, it's often one of those nut behind the butt situations. I've seen scopes fitted to springers with the correct mounts but incorrectly used. It is vital that you ensure the retaining pin is wound out of the rear mount to ensure this fits into the springer to prevent scope creep. If not, then you will probably have a scope hanging off the back of your rifle after a dozen or so shots. This is only on the rear mount and is designed purely to prevent that scope creep. Now, if for some reason you have a springer fitted with a Picatinny rail, then you won't need this pin. Of course, you won't have this situation at all with a PCP because it isn't as aggressive in its action. Fitting level. It is pretty important that you fit a scope level on the top of your rifle, otherwise you'll finish up with a canting scope with the crosshairs out of plumb, which won't make an awful lot of difference to the centre zero, but the moment you try to bring in hold over or hold under into play, then you're going to be introducing side movement into the equation that you really didn't want to do. This will naturally have a big impact on your accuracy. I have completed a tutorial on how to fit your scope, which will explain options to get this level and the correct fitment of a scope also. Now, some scopes have a zero stop, which is an excellent option if you set them correctly and use them right. If not, you may find you can't get the reticle to zero low enough at closer distances, in which case there is nothing wrong with your gun or scope. You simply need to make the correct adjustments in the initial setup. Again, I have completed a tutorial on how to adjust zero scopes correctly. A zero is distance related. There are some people out there who think that once you've zeroed a scope, that's it. And it will be accurate and hit anything at any distance in any condition. Oh, how I wish that were true. But sadly it isn't. Once a scope has been set at, say, 30 metres, it means it's bob on at 30 metres. If you then want to shoot out at 40 or 50 metres, then you're most likely going to need to either re-zero to that distance or dial in the extra distance on your turrets or use hold over or hold under to make up the difference. Now, I don't intend to go into that at great depth here because it's a subject all in its own right, but there are loads of tutorial videos out there to explain this. Needless to say, there is nothing wrong with your gun or scope. It simply needs a little more understanding. One thing I would say is if you have a first focal or second focal plane scope, these hold over and hold under points work slightly differently when using the zoom ring. Again, check out first focal plane explanations. Don't forget, of course, wind. This can have quite an effect on airgun shooting and is exaggerated by greater distances and lighter ammunition. This again needs to be countered using the turrets or reticle points. Sadly, wind isn't a constant and can be pretty difficult to judge. It's about practice, I'm afraid. Lastly, the one thing I haven't really said yet is user error. Most problems around accuracy and a gun's serviceability are predominantly down to the nut behind the butt. It is a sport that is quite addictive and is so very rewarding when you take the time to learn how it's done. The only thing I would say is stay polite and ask for help if you're struggling. Most people will be glad to help, but remember, there are a few people out there who think they know everything. You're probably better taking a couple of people's advice rather than listening to the local self-proclaimed expert, if you know what I mean. I realise this isn't everything that can cause a newbie issues, but these are a few to be getting on with. If you can think of any more, please feel free to leave a helpful comment below, and if it seems necessary, I will gladly address these in a future programme if needed. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week's programme. If so, please give us the old thumbs up, subscribe, feel free to share and click the alarm notification bell. Check out the AAR On Air website for merch news and of course the very popular competitions. A big thank you as always to Vector for their help and involvement. Above all, a big thanks goes out to you guys for supporting the channel. Please stay safe and shoot safe, and hopefully business as usual next time, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.